The first time my parents said no to me, I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills and unopened mail. I remember staring at my phone, waiting for my mother to say anything that sounded like concern. "Layla," she finally said, her voice flat. "We can't lend you $10,000. 10,000. Not for luxury. Not for comfort. Just to keep my life from collapsing." I thanked them anyway. I always did. Years passed. I rebuilt everything on my own, slowly, painfully, quietly. I thought that chapter was over. I thought I was finally free. Then my phone rang again. Same number. Same voices. This time, my father didn't hesitate. "We need $500,000, he said, "for your brother's wedding." I actually laughed, because I thought it had to be a joke. It wasn't. When I said no, the silence on the line felt heavier than all the years they'd ignored me. And that's when I realized this was never just about money. I used to believe that if you worked hard enough, asked politely enough, and proved you were responsible, family would meet you halfway. I believed that because I had to. Letting go of that idea would have meant admitting something far more painful. Back then, my life was unraveling in quiet, humiliating ways. Not the kind of collapse people notice, no dramatic headlines, no sudden disasters. Just invoices piling up, contracts ending without renewal, and that constant tightness in my chest every time my phone buzzed. I was running my own small consulting business, and one bad quarter had turned into 3. Clients vanished. Expenses didn't. I did what everyone says you should do. I cut costs. I downsized my apartment. I sold furniture I loved and pretended I didn't care. I stopped going out, stopped replacing things when they broke, stopped sleeping through the night. Still, it wasn't enough. That's when the numbers started haunting me. $10,000. With it, I could catch up on rent, stabilize my cash flow, and buy myself time. Without it, I was going to lose everything I'd spent years building. I stared at that number like it was a cliff edge. Calling my parents was the last thing I wanted to do. I hadn't asked them for anything since college. I was the independent one, the daughter who figured things out, who didn't need help, who always reassured them, "I'm fine, really," even when I wasn't. But desperation has a way of stripping pride bare. I drove to their house on a gray afternoon, rehearsing my words the entire way. I told myself I wouldn't sound emotional. I wouldn't accuse. I would be practical. This would be a loan. I'd bring paperwork. I'd make it easy for them to say yes. We sat at the kitchen table. Same table where I'd done homework as a kid. Same faint smell of coffee and cleaning spray. My father sat across from me, arms folded. My mother stirred her tea over and over, even after the sugar was gone. "I just need a short-term loan," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. 10,000. I'll pay interest. I'll put it in writing." My father didn't ask for details. He didn't ask how bad things were or how long I'd been struggling. He just leaned back and shook his head once. "That's not something we're comfortable with," he said. I waited. For a follow-up. A question. Anything. My mother finally spoke, eyes still on her cup. "You chose a risky path, Layla. We can't step in every time things get hard." I remember nodding like that made sense. Like I hadn't spent years being careful. Like this wasn't an emergency. "I understand," I said. The words tasted bitter. "I just thought since it's temporary." "We have other priorities," my father cut in. "We need to think about your brother's future." There it was. Ryan. Always just out of frame. Always the unspoken reason. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't remind them of how often I'd helped him, covered for him, encouraged him when no one else would. I just smiled, thanked them for their time, and left. I sat in my car afterward, hands shaking on the steering wheel, staring at the house like it might say something if I waited long enough. It didn't. That night, alone in my apartment, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't just that they'd refused me money. They'd refused to see me as someone worth risking anything for. And that realization stayed with me quiet, heavy, and unresolved for years. After that day, something inside me shut down, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet finality that scared me more than anger ever could. I didn't call my parents to argue. I didn't send long messages explaining myself. I simply disappeared from their emotional orbit. If they wouldn't step in when I was drowning, then I would learn how to swim alone. The months that followed were brutal. I took on every project I could find, no matter how small or exhausting. I worked late into the night, answering emails at 2 in the morning, convincing myself that sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. I negotiated payment plans with landlords, stretched groceries into days, and learned to live with constant anxiety humming under my skin. Some nights, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, wondering how close I was to losing everything. Other nights, I forced myself to plan spreadsheets, projections, backup plans, because planning made me feel like I still had control. Slowly, painfully, it started to work. One client led to another. A short contract turned into a longer one. My bank balance stopped dropping and started inching upward. I wasn't thriving, but I was surviving. And with each small win, something else grew alongside my finances. Distance. My parents never checked in. No. How are you holding up? No. Do you need anything? No acknowledgement that I'd ever been on the brink. But Ryan, my younger brother, was everywhere in their lives. I heard about him through secondhand comments and casual mentions. Ryan had quit another job. Ryan was exploring opportunities. Ryan needed help with rent again. Ryan wanted to travel to clear his head. And my parents paid. Every time. When Ryan struggled, it was framed as potential. When I struggled, it was framed as poor decision-making. I told myself not to be bitter. I told myself I was imagining the imbalance. But deep down, I knew better. I'd always known. By the time I was stable again, truly stable, I had changed. I'd learned how to rely on myself, how to say no to unpaid labor, how to protect my time and energy. I stopped explaining my choices to people who had already made up their minds about me. I assumed my parents and I would continue in that quiet, distant way. Polite calls on holidays, short conversations, no expectations. Then the engagement announcement came. Ryan was getting married. My mother called, her voice suddenly bright, animated in a way I hadn't heard in years. She talked about venues, guest lists, flowers, colors. She sounded proud, excited. I listened, nodding to an empty room. They want to do something really special, she said. Madison's family has certain standards. That word made my stomach tighten. Standards. A few weeks later, my father called. Not to ask how I was. Not to congratulate me on my recent success. Not even to reconnect. Layla, he said, skipping any greeting. We need to discuss your contribution to the wedding. I remember leaning back in my chair, already uneasy. My contribution? Yes, he said matter-of-factly. $500,000. I thought I'd misheard him. I'm sorry, how much? 500, he repeated. It's important we present ourselves properly. Ryan can't fall short compared to Madison's family. I felt something cold spread through my chest. You refused to lend me 10,000, I said slowly. When I was desperate. That was different. My mother snapped from the background. Different. Because I was the wrong child. Because my crisis wasn't worth the risk. Because my survival had never been the priority. I won't do it, I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. I'm not paying for this. The silence that followed was thick, loaded. My father spoke last. If you don't support your brother, he said, then don't expect to be treated like family. The call ended. I stared at my phone, hands steady, heart racing. For the first time, I didn't feel crushed. I felt clear. Because now I understood. The distance I'd built wasn't something to fix. It was something that had saved me. I thought saying no would end it. I was wrong. The pressure didn't come all at once. It seeped in from every direction, subtle at first, almost polite. My aunt left a voicemail that started with concern and ended with disappointment. A cousin sent a long text about family unity and how weddings were once-in-a-lifetime moments. Even an old family friend messaged me on social media, reminding me how much my parents had sacrificed for us growing up. No one asked how I felt. No one mentioned the $10,000. No one acknowledged the years I'd spent rebuilding my life without help. The message was always the same, just dressed up differently. Be the bigger person. Ryan reached out last. Layla, he wrote. I didn't expect this from you. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. What did you expect? That's when he called. His voice was tight, wounded. Do you know how this makes me look? Madison's family is covering so much already. Mom and Dad are under pressure. So am I said quietly. This isn't about you, he snapped. This is my wedding. I closed my eyes. When I asked for $10,000 to keep my life from collapsing, that wasn't about me either. It was about survival. He went silent. Then he sighed. Like I was the problem. You've always been dramatic. That word dramatic landed harder than I expected. It was the same word my parents used whenever I expressed discomfort, whenever I pushed back, whenever I didn't quietly absorb disappointment. I'm not dramatic, I said. I'm setting a boundary. He laughed bitterly. That's just a nice way of saying you don't care. I ended the call. Over the next week, the tone shifted. Politeness gave way to accusation. My parents sent messages questioning my character, my gratitude, my loyalty. My mother wrote, "We didn't raise you to be this cold." My father warned, "Actions have consequences." I didn't respond. Instead, I started documenting everything: screenshots, timestamps, notes. Not because I wanted a fight, but because something in their words felt different this time. Sharper. More insistent. Like they believed pressure would eventually force compliance. At night, I replayed old memories I'd tried to forget. The way my achievements were acknowledged with nods, while Ryan's smallest wins were celebrated. The times I was told to understand because I was older. Stronger. More capable. I realized then that this wasn't about a wedding. It was about control. For years, I'd been useful when I was quiet and accommodating. The moment I said no, truly no, I became a problem to be corrected. The wedding date crept closer, and with it, the tension. I knew they expected me to break, to show up with a check and a forced smile. But something had changed. I wasn't desperate anymore, and I wasn't alone in my own head. For the first time, I wasn't asking myself how to keep the peace. I was asking myself how far I was willing to let them go, and whether I was finally ready to let them face the answer. By the time the invitations went out, I had learned something important. No amount of explaining would ever be enough for people who were determined not to understand you. My parents stopped hinting and started demanding. My mother called one afternoon while I was working. I almost didn't answer, but a small part of me still hoped ridiculously that she might say something different this time. "Layla," she began, her voice strained. "Your father and I are under incredible stress." I stayed silent. "You know how people talk," she continued. "Madison's family is watching everything, every detail. If we fall short, it reflects on all of us." "All of you," I corrected calmly. "Not me." There was a sharp intake of breath. "How can you say that? You're Ryan's sister." "I'm also the daughter you refused to help when I was desperate," I replied. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. She lowered her tone, switching tactics. "We raised you. We sacrificed so much. Is this how you repay us?" I closed my eyes for a moment. This was the script I'd known my whole life: gratitude used like a leash. "I'm grateful," I said, "but gratitude isn't a blank check." She didn't respond right away. Then, quietly, she said, "If you don't contribute, don't come to the wedding." There it was, the line in the sand. "Okay," I answered. The word landed heavier than any argument. That night, my father sent a message that was colder than anything he'd said before. "You're making a choice you can't undo." I read it once, then placed my phone face down on the table. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to defend myself. I didn't draft responses in my head. I didn't rehearse conversations that would never happen. Instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. I realized that all my life, I'd been trying to earn a place that should have been mine by default. I'd softened my words, minimized my needs, and swallowed resentment just to stay connected. But connection built on fear wasn't connection at all. It was compliance. And I was done complying. I didn't know yet how far my parents would go. I didn't know what lines they were willing to cross. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. If I kept explaining myself, they would keep believing I owed them something. So I stopped. And in that silence, I finally heard my own voice, steady, clear, and no longer asking for permission. I didn't plan on going to the wedding. For weeks, I told myself there was no reason to put my body in a room my spirit had already left. But the closer the date came, the more I felt a strange pull, not obligation, not hope, but the need for closure. I didn't want my absence to become another story they could twist. I wanted to stand there, see the truth clearly, and walk away on my own terms. So, I went. The venue looked like something out of a magazine. Tall glass walls, white flowers everywhere, soft music floating through the air. It was beautiful in the way expensive things often are: polished, impressive, and emotionally distant. I arrived alone. No one greeted me. No one showed me to my seat. I found my name on a small card at a table near the back, far from my parents, far from Ryan. The message was clear without a single word being spoken. During the ceremony, I watched my brother smile like he'd never known disappointment. Ryan looked confident, adored, completely certain the world would always catch him when he fell. My parents sat in the front row, my mother dabbing her eyes, my father standing tall with pride. I felt invisible. At the reception, people whispered. I caught fragments as I walked past. That's her. The sister. Did you hear she refused to help? I kept my head up. I reminded myself to breathe. Then my father stood up. He took the microphone with the ease of someone who believed he was entitled to every room he entered. The music faded. Conversations stopped. Glasses were set down. I want to thank everyone who helped make today possible, he began, smiling broadly. Family is everything. My stomach tightened. He paused, scanning the room slowly, deliberately until his eyes landed on me. It's unfortunate, he continued, his tone shifting just enough, that not everyone understands what family responsibility means. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people, he said, forget their roots when they become successful. They turn their backs when they're needed most. Every eye turned toward me. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure people could hear it. I felt heat rush to my face, not from shame but from something sharper, deeper. Years of swallowed words pressed against my chest, demanding air. I stood. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound cut through the room like a blade. I didn't forget my roots, I said, my voice steady, clear, louder than I expected. I remember them very well. My father froze. I remember asking for $10,000 when my life was falling apart, I continued. Not for comfort, not for luxury, just to survive. The room was completely silent now. I remember being told no. I remember being told I was a risk. And I remember rebuilding my life alone. My mother's face went pale. So don't stand here, I said, meeting my father's eyes, and rewrite history because I refuse to be used. Ryan stared at the floor. I'm not selfish, I finished. I'm done sacrificing myself to make everyone else comfortable. No one clapped. No one moved. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out. Each step felt surreal, like my body was moving before my mind could catch up. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside, and for the first time that day, I could breathe. My hands were shaking. My chest hurt. But beneath it all, there was something else, something unfamiliar, relief, because in that moment, in front of everyone who had judged me in silence, I had finally told the truth out loud, and there was no going back. I thought walking out of the wedding would be the end of it. I was wrong again. 2 days later, my office receptionist buzzed my phone. Layla, your parents are here. I felt my stomach drop. They didn't have an appointment, she added quietly. They said it's urgent. I stood up slowly. Please ask them to leave. Before she could respond, I heard my father's voice echo down the hallway low, controlled, and unmistakably angry. So this is how you live now, he said as he stepped into my office without permission. My mother followed, her lips pressed tight, eyes sharp instead of tearful this time. There was no apology, no embarrassment about the scene at the wedding, only resentment. You humiliated us, my father said, in front of everyone. I stayed behind my desk, keeping distance between us. You humiliated yourselves. My mother's voice trembled not with sadness, but with fury. Do you have any idea what people are saying about us? I almost laughed. What about what people said about me? I asked. For years. My father leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. You've crossed a line, Layla. You don't get to turn your back on your family and walk away clean. Something in his tone made my skin prickle. It wasn't grief. It wasn't disappointment. It was pressure. Please leave, I said calmly. If you don't, I'll call security. My mother scoffed. You wouldn't. I pressed the button under my desk. When security arrived and escorted them out, my father looked back at me, eyes hard. This isn't over, he said. The door closed behind them. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, my heart racing not with fear, but with certainty. That was the moment I understood something critical. This was no longer a family conflict. It was a boundary being tested, and I was done letting anyone cross it. I didn't sleep much after that. Not because I regretted what I'd done, but because my instincts were finally awake. Every text message made my shoulders tense. Every unknown number felt heavier than it should have. I realized how used I was to brushing things off, telling myself they don't really mean it, they're just emotional, it will blow over. This time, I refused to gamble with my safety or my livelihood. So I did something I'd never done before. I treated the situation the way it actually was, not the way I wished it would be. I called a lawyer. Saying the words out loud, I need advice about harassment from my parents, felt surreal. Part of me still wanted to minimize it, to make excuses for them. But as I read through the messages, listened to the voicemails again, and described the office incident, my voice grew steadier. These aren't misunderstandings, the lawyer said calmly. They're attempts to intimidate. That sentence settled something in my chest. With her guidance, I started documenting everything properly. Dates, times, exact wording, witnesses. I learned how patterns mattered more than single moments, how repetition turned pressure into something legally recognizable. A formal letter went out a few days later, clear, professional, unemotional. It stated that any further contact outside of written communication through legal counsel would be considered harassment. It demanded distance. It set consequences. When my parents received it, my phone stayed silent. No calls, no messages, no dramatic last words. Just silence. And for the first time in months, the quiet didn't feel threatening. It felt protective. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was something much deeper and harder earned. Control. Not over them, but over my own life. I understood then that boundaries only work when they're enforced, and love that requires self-destruction isn't love at all. I had taken the conflict out of the family system, where emotions ruled, and placed it in reality, where rules existed. And in that shift, I finally felt safe enough to breathe. People like to say that walking away is the easy choice. It isn't. Walking away means letting go of the version of your parents you kept hoping they would become. It means accepting that love, when tied to conditions and threats, isn't something you can fix by trying harder. After the letter went out, weeks passed, then months. No apologies came, no attempts at reconciliation. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. I stopped waiting. I focused on my work. I rebuilt my routines. I surrounded myself with people who didn't flinch when I said no, who didn't treat my boundaries like a personal attack. I slept better. I laughed more. I stopped replaying old conversations in my head, wondering what I should have said differently. For the first time, my life felt calm, not because everything was perfect, but because nothing was constantly threatening to collapse. I still think about my parents sometimes, about Ryan, about the wedding I walked out of and the family I stepped away from. But the memories no longer come with panic or guilt. They come with clarity. I didn't abandon my family. I stopped abandoning myself. Saying no didn't make me heartless. Protecting myself didn't make me cruel. Choosing peace didn't make me selfish. It made me whole. And if there's one thing I know now, it's this. Love that demands your silence, your money, or your fear isn't love. It's control. I chose freedom instead.